They thought her scars made her weak. They had no idea those scars came from saving a life. The cruel laughter echoed through Maple Diner as Kate Thompson served another table, her long sleeves hiding the burned scars that made her a target. But when a stranger noticed the small tattoo on her wrist, everything changed. Some heroes don't wear uniforms, they wear aprons and carry invisible wounds. The fluorescent lights of Maple Diner cast harsh shadows across the worn vinyl booths, where the smell of burnt coffee and yesterday's grease hung thick in the Detroit suburb air. Inside, the familiar symphony of clinking plates and sizzling grease filled the air. The black and white checkered floor bore the scuff marks of countless work boots, and the pie case by the register held the same 3 flavors it had offered since 1995. Emily Catherine Kate Thompson moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her long sleeves pulled down to her wrists despite the kitchen's oppressive heat. At 32, she carried herself with quiet dignity, but there was something guarded in her green eyes, something that spoke of experiences far beyond the walls of this small-town diner. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, revealing burn scars that traced from her left ear down her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. 3 years ago, she had been Sergeant Thompson, a 68W combat medic with the Army's 10th Mountain Division. 3 tours in Afghanistan had ended abruptly when an IED explosion changed everything. The blast that nearly killed her had left its mark, severe burns across her arms, neck, and torso from pulling wounded soldiers from a burning armored vehicle. The Army had given her the Bronze Star with Valor and Purple Heart. The VA had given her disability payments and therapy sessions for PTSD. But neither could give her back the confidence she'd lost or the sense of purpose that had defined her for so long. Now, she worked the evening shift at Maple Diner, saving every dollar for a small apartment and the therapy sessions that kept her nightmares at bay. The work was honest, if not glamorous, and most customers treated her with the casual politeness reserved for service workers. Most customers, but not the 3 men who had made her their Friday night entertainment. Brad Morrison, a loud-mouthed car salesman, Rick Stevens, a mechanic with cruel eyes, and Tony Walsh, a warehouse worker who seemed to find her struggle amusing. They'd discovered her scars 2 months ago during a particularly busy night, when she'd rolled up her sleeves to clean a spill. Since then, they'd made it their mission to remind her of what they saw as her freakish appearance. Frankenstein, they called her. Monster. Freak show. The management knew other customers saw it, but nobody intervened. Kate endured it because she needed the job, because she couldn't afford to start over again. This Friday evening felt different from the moment Kate clocked in at 4 p.m. The autumn air carried a chill that seemed to seep through the diner's windows, and she found herself checking the clock more frequently than usual. Pete Kowalski, the 60-year-old owner, had been in a foul mood all day, complaining about rising food costs and declining customer loyalty. He'd hired Kate despite her obvious struggles with crowds and sudden noises, but his patience had limits. At 6:30 p.m., the familiar sound of loud voices announced the arrival of her weekly tormentors. Brad Morrison strutted through the door with his usual entourage, their work clothes reeking of cigarettes and cheap cologne. They claimed their regular booth in the back corner, the one with the ripped seat that no one else wanted. "Well, well," Brad announced loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. "Look who's working tonight, our favorite monster movie star." Kate felt the familiar tightness in her chest, but forced herself to approach their table with menus. This was her test, her weekly battle to prove she could handle whatever they threw at her. She'd survived roadside bombs and enemy fire. She could survive Brad Morrison's cruelty. "Evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice steady. "What can I get you to drink?" "Depends." Rick leaned back with a smirk. "You gonna tell us how you got so messed up? Come on, share the story. We're all dying to know what happened to make you look like that." Kate had developed strategies over the months. Keep interactions brief. Don't make eye contact. Focus on the work. Remember that their words said more about them than about her. She'd learned these techniques in therapy, along with breathing exercises and grounding methods to prevent panic attacks. "I'll give you a minute to look at the menu," she replied, turning away before Rick could respond. In the kitchen, she leaned against the prep counter, using the breathing techniques Dr. Martinez had taught her. 4 counts in hold for 4 counts out. The familiar routine helped slow her racing heart and clear the fog of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her. When she returned to their table, Tony had his phone out, pretending to take pictures. "Hey, Facebook friends," he said loudly, "check out our local freak show. Bet you never seen anything this scary outside of a horror movie." The other customers began to stare. Kate felt the walls closing in, the familiar symptoms building: rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, the sensation that she was back in that burning vehicle in Kabul. She closed her eyes for a moment, using the grounding techniques that had become second nature. "I need your order," she said quietly. "What's that speak-up monster girl?" Brad taunted. "Use that voice you probably had before you got all burned up." Kate's jaw tightened. She thought about the soldiers she'd saved, the lives she'd held in her hands the moment she'd crawled into that burning armored vehicle to pull out 3 wounded men. These civilians knew nothing about courage, nothing about sacrifice, nothing about the weight of carrying others' lives in your hands. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of breaking her. "Not tonight. Not ever. I'll come back when you're ready to order," she said, walking away as their laughter echoed behind her like a challenge she couldn't answer. The harassment escalated throughout the evening. Brad and his friends ordered the cheapest items on the menu, then complained about everything. The coffee was too hot, the service too slow, Kate's attitude too uppity. Each interaction was designed to chip away at her composure, to remind her of her place in their twisted hierarchy. "You know what your problem is," Rick said during one visit to refill their coffee. "You think you're too good for us because you got yourself all burned up. But look at you now, just another freak serving coffee to normal people." Kate's hand trembled slightly as she poured, but she said nothing. Around the diner, other customers shifted uncomfortably. An elderly couple in the corner booth whispered to each other, clearly disturbed. A trucker at the counter shook his head, but didn't intervene. The unspoken rule seemed to be that this was Kate's problem to handle alone. By 7:30 p.m., the dinner rush was in full swing. Kate found herself grateful for the distraction of busy tables and complex orders. She moved with military precision, taking orders, delivering food, managing multiple tables simultaneously. The skills she'd learned in the Army, staying calm under pressure, multitasking, maintaining focus despite chaos, served her well in the restaurant environment. But Brad wasn't finished with her. As she passed their table carrying a tray of food, he deliberately stuck out his foot. Kate stumbled, catching herself, but spilling barbecue sauce across her uniform sleeve. The sticky liquid soaked through the fabric, revealing the burned scars on her forearm in stark detail. "Oops!" Brad laughed loudly. "Sorry about that. But hey, now everyone can see your artwork up close." The entire diner fell silent. Kate stood frozen, her scarred arm exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. The burns were severe, twisted, discolored skin that spoke of unimaginable pain and months of recovery. For the first time in months, she felt completely vulnerable, stripped of the protective barrier her long sleeves provided. "Jesus Christ," Tony whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's even worse than I thought. How do you even look at yourself in the mirror?" Kate felt tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough over these scars, over the life they'd cost her, over the dreams they'd destroyed. She wouldn't give these men the satisfaction of seeing her break. At table 12, Michael Harrison sat alone, having just ordered the meatloaf special after a long day at the construction site. The 48-year-old engineer had come to Maple Diner for a quiet dinner before heading home to his wife and 2 daughters. He'd been reading the sports section when the commotion started, but now his full attention was focused on the scene unfolding before him. As a father, Michael's protective instincts were immediately triggered by the obvious cruelty being directed at the young waitress. But as he looked more closely at Kate's exposed arm, something else caught his attention. There, partially visible beneath the burn scars, was a small tattoo, the distinctive caduceus symbol of the Army Medical Corps, along with what appeared to be unit numbers. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The combination of the medical symbol, the severe burn scars, and the woman's age triggered a memory he'd carried for 4 years. Afghanistan, 2019. The phone call that had changed his life. His son David, critically wounded in a convoy attack, saved by a female medic who'd been burned pulling soldiers from a vehicle fire. Could it really be her? After all these years in this small Detroit suburb, Michael studied Kate's face more carefully, looking past the scars that traced down her neck, past the careful mask of professional composure she wore like armor. There, in the set of her shoulders, the way she moved with purpose, despite the harassment, he saw something familiar. Something that reminded him of the description his son had given him of the medic who'd saved his life. His heart began to race as the pieces fell into place. The timing was right. She would have been discharged around 2020, giving her time to struggle with civilian life before ending up here. The burn scars matched what David had told him about his rescuer's injuries. And that tattoo, he'd never forget the unit designation his son had mentioned. As Brad launched into another cruel tirade, "I bet you got those scars doing something stupid. Probably your own fault, right? That's what happens to people who don't pay attention." Michael made his decision. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound cut through Brad's laughter, drawing attention from across the diner. Michael was a big man, 6'1", with broad shoulders and hands scarred from years of construction work. When he moved with purpose, people noticed. The diner fell silent, except for the hum of the coffee machine and the distant sound of traffic outside. Brad and his friends stopped their snickering, sensing that something significant was happening, but not understanding what. Michael Harrison stood beside his table, his weathered face grave, as he looked directly at Kate. "Excuse me, miss," Michael said, his voice carrying clearly across the restaurant. "Could I ask you something?" Kate looked up surprised by the interruption. Her scarred arm was still exposed, the barbecue sauce staining her sleeve, and she felt more vulnerable than she had in months. "Yes, sir. That tattoo on your arm, the medical corps symbol. What unit were you with?" The question hit Kate like a physical blow. No one had asked about her service in months. Most people saw the scars and made assumptions, but they never asked about the uniform she'd once worn with pride. I was with the 10th Mountain Division, 6th Gate W Combat Medic." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "Afghanistan?" "Yes, sir. 3 tours." Kate's voice was barely above a whisper. "What's your name, soldier?" The use of her former title made Kate stand straighter, her military bearing becoming visible for the first time in years. "Sergeant Emily Thompson, sir, but everyone called me Kate." Michael took a step closer, his hand shaking. "Kate Thompson, October 15th, 2019, convoy attack near Kabul. Do you remember?" The date hit Kate like lightning. October 15th, 2019. The day that changed everything. The memories came flooding back, the emergency call, the race to the attack site, the burning armored vehicle with 3 soldiers trapped inside. The heat, the smoke, the desperate scramble to pull them to safety before the fuel tank exploded. "I remember," she whispered. Brad looked between them, confused and annoyed by the interruption to his entertainment. "What the hell is this? Some kind of military reunion? We're trying to have a conversation here." Michael turned to face Brad, and for the first time since entering the diner, his voice carried an edge of pure fury. "You want to know how she got those scars? She got them saving my son's life." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Around the diner, customers leaned forward, sensing that they were witnessing something momentous. "Your son?" Kate asked, her voice breaking. "David Harrison, Sergeant David Harrison, 3rd Infantry Division. He was 22 years old, trapped in a burning vehicle with 2 other soldiers. You crawled into that fire and pulled all 3 of them out. You saved their lives." Kate's legs went weak. She remembered David Young, scared, badly injured, but alive when she dragged him from the wreckage. She remembered the weight of his unconscious body, the heat of the flames, the moment when the fuel tank had exploded, sending burning metal fragments tearing through her arms and neck. "Is he—" She couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's married now, has a little girl. He talks about you all the time, the medic who saved his life. He said you were burned, pulling him out, that you kept working on him even while you were injured." Rick's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. She's just a waitress. She can't be some kind of war hero." Michael turned to address the entire diner, his voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant. "This woman crawled into a burning vehicle to save 3 soldiers. She sustained 3rd-degree burns over 30% of her body, but refused medical treatment until all her patients were stabilized. She received the Bronze Star with Valor and the Purple Heart." The silence in the diner was absolute. Kate could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every eye in the room. Brad and his friends sat frozen, their earlier cruelty completely evaporated in the face of this revelation. "Those scars you've been making fun of," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "She got them being a hero. She got them saving lives. She got them doing something you 3 cowards could never do, putting someone else's life before her own." Tony started to stand as if to leave, but Michael's voice stopped him. Sit down. You're not going anywhere until you understand exactly who you've been tormenting. The transformation in the diner's atmosphere was immediate and complete. Where moments before there had been uncomfortable tolerance of the harassment, now there was palpable hostility directed at Brad and his friends. Customers who had remained silent for weeks now stared at them with undisguised disgust. Pete Kowalski emerged from behind the counter, his weathered face flushed with shame. He'd watched Kate endure months of abuse, had chosen profits over protecting his employee, and now the full weight of his cowardice was on display for everyone to see. "Kate," Pete said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I should have stopped this months ago." But Kate wasn't looking at Pete. Her eyes were fixed on Michael, tears streaming down her face as memories of that terrible day in Afghanistan came flooding back. She remembered David's face, so young and frightened as she'd worked to stop his bleeding. She remembered promising him he'd be okay, that she'd get him home to his family. "How is he really?" she asked. "David, is he okay?" Michael smiled through his own tears. "He's more than okay. He finished his degree, got married to his high school sweetheart. They have a daughter, Emma. She's 2 years old. He works as a paramedic now, says you inspired him to help people." "He became a paramedic." Kate's voice was filled with wonder. "He said he wanted to save lives like you did. He tells Emma stories about the brave soldier who saved Daddy's life. You're a hero to my whole family, Kate." Brad Morrison had gone completely silent, his face cycling through shades of red and white as the full implications of the situation sank in. The woman he'd been tormenting for months wasn't just some damaged waitress. She was a decorated combat veteran who had risked everything to save lives. "I didn't know," he stammered. "How was I supposed to know?" "You didn't want to know," said a voice from the back of the diner. An elderly man in a Vietnam veteran's cap had stood up, his weathered hands gripping his coffee cup. "You saw someone you thought was weak, someone you could hurt without consequences. You never bothered to learn who she really was." One by one, other customers began to stand. A woman whose son was deployed in Iraq. A retired Marine who recognized the look of someone carrying invisible wounds. A young mother who had been disgusted by the harassment but hadn't known how to intervene. "I want to apologize," said the woman with the deployed son. "I should have said something sooner. Thank you for your service." The wave of support was overwhelming. Kate stood in the middle of it all, her scarred arm still exposed, no longer a source of shame, but a visible reminder of her courage. For the first time in 3 years, she felt truly seen for who she was, rather than what had happened to her. Michael approached her slowly. "Kate, I know this is overwhelming, but I have to ask, would you like to see David again? He's been looking for you for years. He wanted to thank you properly." Kate nodded, unable to speak. The idea of seeing David again, of knowing that her sacrifice had meant something, filled her with a warmth she hadn't felt since leaving the army. "There's something else," Michael continued. "David isn't the only one you saved that day. The other 2 soldiers, Marcus Williams and James Chin, they're both alive too. Marcus is a teacher, now has 3 kids. James runs a non-profit for wounded veterans. They've all been looking for you." The revelation was almost too much to process. Kate had carried the weight of that day for 4 years, had wondered if her sacrifice had been worth the pain, the scars, the life she'd lost. Now she was learning that not only had she saved 3 lives, But those lives had gone on to touch countless others. Brad Morrison finally found his voice. "Kate, I, we, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known, if you'd known what—" Kate interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "If you'd known I was a veteran, if you'd known I'd been wounded in combat, would that have made a difference?" She stepped closer to their table, her military bearing fully visible now. "I shouldn't have had to earn your respect by bleeding for it. I shouldn't have had to prove my worth by showing you my medals. I deserved basic human dignity just for being a person." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "But since you want to know, yes, I'm a combat veteran. Yes, I'm a decorated soldier. Yes, I saved lives, and I'd do it again without hesitation. These scars aren't marks of shame. They're proof that when it mattered most, I chose to run toward danger instead of away from it." The entire diner erupted in applause. Kate stood in the center of it all, her scars visible and her head held high, finally understanding that she had nothing to be ashamed of. Rick Stevens, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "We'll leave," he said quietly. "We won't come back. And Kate, I'm sorry. We were wrong about everything." As the three men gathered their things and headed for the door, the elderly Vietnam veteran called out, "You boys just learned something important tonight. Remember it." The door chimed as they left, and the diner erupted in conversation. Customers approached Kate one by one, thanking her for her service, sharing their own stories of family members in the military, asking about her experiences with genuine interest and respect. The story of what happened at Maple Diner that Friday night spread through the Detroit suburb like wildfire. By Monday morning, everyone in the neighborhood knew about Kate Thompson and her heroic service. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the decorated veteran who had been hiding in plain sight, enduring harassment, while quietly serving her community. Pete Kowalski, overwhelmed by guilt and determined to make amends, promoted Kate to assistant manager and gave her a substantial raise. More importantly, he instituted a zero-tolerance policy for harassment of any kind. "This is a place where everyone is treated with respect," he announced to his staff and regular customers. Within a week, Maple Diner had become an unofficial gathering place for local veterans. Word had spread through the veteran community about Kate's story, and former service members began stopping by to meet her, share their own experiences, and find the kind of understanding that only comes from shared sacrifice. Michael Harrison kept his promise. 2 weeks after their encounter at the diner, he brought David to meet Kate. The reunion was emotional and healing for both of them. David, now 26 and a father himself, was able to properly thank the woman who had saved his life. Kate was able to see that her sacrifice had meaning, that the young soldier she'd pulled from that burning vehicle had gone on to build a beautiful life. The meeting led to connections with the other soldiers she'd saved. Marcus Williams drove up from Ohio with his family. James Chen flew in from California, bringing photos of the veterans his nonprofit had helped. The four of them, Kate and the three men whose lives she'd saved, formed a bond that transcended their shared trauma, becoming a source of strength and healing for each other. 6 months later, Kate stood before a packed auditorium at the Detroit Veterans Affairs Medical Center, delivering a speech about resilience and the true meaning of heroism. Her scars were clearly visible in her dress uniform, her medals gleaming on her chest. In the front row, sat Michael Harrison and his family, including little Emma, who called her Aunt Kate. Our scars tell the story of our service. Kate told the crowd, her voice strong and clear. They're not marks of weakness, they're proof of our strength. They show the world that when others needed us most, we answered the call. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. Kate Thompson, the woman who had once hidden her scars in shame, had become a beacon of hope for veterans everywhere, proving that true heroism isn't measured by the absence of wounds, but by the courage to keep serving despite them.